what is a summer solstice? A summer solstice is simply this. The sun rose the furthest north it's going to all year, and it keeps rising in that spot, or stands still. That's a solstice, a solar standstill. And then starting today, it begins moving south. Here's the hypothesis. If you had been here Friday or Saturday of last week, and you had stood on the left-hand road where that one post was, and you looked back out this gateway where the moat bends around into this entrance, from where you stood at about 6 o'clock in the morning, it would look like the sun, like a great golden marble, is rolling up and out of that chute. What we learned following research by two fellows named Hively and Horn in 1982, published in 1983, is that what we had been overlooking for not just years, but really for centuries, as Western science had looked at and studied and tried to understand what were Native Americans doing here and why did they put 7 million basket loads of earth in place to build this geometry. What we found is that center alignment from the observatory mound, some 18 feet tall, probably back in the day, looking through the center point of the circle and the center point of the octagon to a point in the northeast sky that is not the summer solstice, is not the equinox either. It's some ambivalent point in between, and since primitive, prehistoric people really only understood the sun because it's simple, 3 points, 1 year cycle, well, there must not be any astronomical alignments in the circle and octagon. Unless it's the moon. It can't be the moon. Okay? You got me? It can't be the moon. Because the moon is too complicated for primitive Indians to understand. The moon goes back and forth, not in a year, but in 28 days. And then every 28 days, the cycle is narrower and wider. And then every cycle, narrower and wider itself, gets narrower and wider. It's a 3-variable math problem, and it takes 18.6 years to calculate. So you'd have to observe and record 3 or 4 cycles, which is like almost 100 years, which means you'd have to have some form of record keeping in order to study it, understand it, and build architecture around it. So clearly it couldn't be the moon, right? Hively and Horn said, well, it's clearly not solar. We might as well at least check. And it turns out the absolute northernmost rise point of the moon in that 18.6 year cycle is that center axis. And that wall we were standing next to points directly, it's 600 some foot length, at the furthest south point of the moon's rising. And we can extrapolate using the geometries of the circle and octagon all of the other key rise points and set points of that 9.3 and complete 18.6 year cycle. We don't know exactly how they did it, but I would argue to you, pointing at the circle and octagon and the knowledge it records, there can be no doubt they had some form of encoding data and passing it on through the generations. And the evidence is literally written on the